So to start off with, I'm just going to talk quickly about the four basic components of programming. And this is not specific to Python. This is basically how all programming works. But it could be useful for you to start thinking more generally about the basic components of this scripting workflow. And the four basic components we have are variables, we have conditionals, we have loops, and we have functions. Alright, and I'm just going to talk about each one. And you'll see that some of these are directly related to concepts we've already been exploring in Grasshopper, but because this is all based on text and very specific, the definition of how you use these things becomes a lot more specific. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is variables, and variables are basically placeholders or containers where you can store information. And this works really similar to how we were working with Grasshopper and the parameters. Here we had these containers which store either numbers or booleans or text or actually geometry. And we work with variables the same way in scripts, but in text, variables can be anything. So as long as you don't use like a keyword, you can actually use any name for a variable. So we can start off with saying maybe text. So text isn't a keyword in Python. You see it's just black by default, and that means we can start assigning anything, any piece of information, and it will be contained in this text variable. So here we can say hello world again. So now this piece of text is contained within this text variable, and now we can actually print that variable, and you can see it just prints hello world because that variable is tied to what we assigned to it in the line above. Okay, so that introduces the first type of variable. It's called a string. So a string is any piece of text. It's a series of characters, and it's always contained within these quotation marks. So if you put quotation marks, it tells Python that you're actually trying to store a piece of text. So as I go along, you see I'm using this hash sign. Anything you put after a hash sign is basically ignored by Python. So it's called comment, and it's a way you can mark up your script so you can build in like explanations or notes to yourself, and it won't actually be executed by Python, and it'll turn green to let you know that's happening. The second type of variable are numbers. So this is just like in Grasshopper, we can work with several types of numbers. We can work with integers. So here I'll just create a variable called int_var, and integers are just whole numbers. The other type of number are floats or real numbers. So here I'll say float_var, and those are numbers that can take a decimal point. All right. And then all the different types of variables that are supported in Grasshopper are also supported in Python. We can have booleans. So here I'll just have a boolean variable, and I can type in true or false. And you can see here I'm capitalizing true and false, and once Python recognizes a keyword, so this actually means something to Python, it'll turn blue. Okay, so this is a way for you to know that what you're typing in is actually a function or a keyword in Python. Now if I use lowercase, you can see that it won't be recognized. So this actually won't be recognized as a Boolean keyword. Alright, so those are the four kind of really standard basic variables that we're going to use in our scripts. In addition to storing variables, we can also do basic arithmetic with functions that are built into Python. So we can do things like add numbers together. We say 2 plus 2. And we can assign that to a new variable called result. So here result will be 2 plus 2. And then we can print the result. And it's going to be 4. So we can do a lot of things like addition, multiplication, and any other operation. So the last topic I'm going to discuss with variables are multi-object variables. So these are variables that contain actually lists of data. So instead of containing one object like one number or one piece of text, they actually contain a series of values. So in Python, to declare a list of values, we use the square bracket notation. So anything contained within square brackets tells Python that you're actually trying to build a container with multiple pieces of data. And again, this works just like with Grasshopper, where any node can contain either one piece of information or can contain multiple pieces of information stored in a sequence. So here in square brackets, we can just start typing pieces of data, and then each piece of data was separated by a comma. So here I'm building a list of integers. I can also create lists of strings. So here I say 1, 2, 3. So both of these are lists, they work exactly the same way, and they basically store a sequence of data. And this becomes really useful when working with multiple pieces of data or numbers or geometry. So this will allow us to store data in a list, and then to retrieve specific items from that list, we use an approach very similar to Grasshopper. In Grasshopper, if we had multiple pieces of data, we might use something like a list item node, and in this node we can pass a list, and then we tell it the item index, basically, or the number of, or the place of that item within the list. And we do the same exact thing with Python, and for this we use this square bracket notation again. So to retrieve one piece of information, I'll create a variable called num, and then to retrieve a piece of specific information from the list var variable, we type its name, and then in the square brackets we put the index of the piece of information we want. So just like in Grasshopper when we use the list item, you can think of this as kind of passing in that list and then passing this index of the number we want. So once we have that piece of data, we'll print it just to see that we got the right thing. So here num is being assigned to the first item in the list var. Remember that in programming, the first item is always denoted by 0, so counting always starts with 0. And then we print that number out, so we get 1. And then we can get any of these numbers. So if we pass in 2, we get the third item, so we get the number 3. And we can do the same exact thing with text lists. So here we have text list var, and we output the value 3. And there are some additional functions that are useful for working with lists. Here I'm just going to introduce adding to a list. Often we start with a blank list, and then we actually build it up through the script. So to create a blank list, we just pass empty square brackets. So this is basically telling Python that this blank list will be a list of values, but right now there's nothing contained in that list. And then we can use the append function to add values to that list. So to do that, we type out the name of the list and then hit dot append parentheses, and in the parentheses we put whatever we want to add to that list. So here I'll say 2. And this introduces one of the key functionalities of Python, which is accessing functions within objects. So here blank list is an object, it's a list, and to get access to its particular functions we use the dot syntax. So we say dot, and then append is the function, and anytime you call a function, just like any node within Grasshopper, a function takes in inputs and it generates outputs, right? So here we're calling this function, and in the parentheses right after the function we put in what inputs we want. So append is a particular function. As inputs it takes any values, and then it basically adds those values to the list. So if we append the number 2 and then we print our blank list, it prints out 2, and it keeps it in these square brackets to tell us that it is in fact a list. And we can do this any number of times. In order, we can append number 4 and print it out, and you see now it has 2 and 4 in the list. So that's a really basic introduction to working with variables, both single objects and multiple object lists, and that's going to come in really useful as we start building up our scripts.